Hello and welcome to the channel. I'm Janu, and today we're diving into a story that matters not only in Washington, D.C., but globally. The ongoing U.S. federal government shutdown, its causes, consequences, and what it reveals about American governance. We'll explore what triggered the shutdown, who is at fault, what the impacts are, and how this could shape both U.S. domestic politics and international perceptions. Let's get started. Section 1. What's happening? The federal government of the United States went into shutdown as of October 1, 2025. At its root, the shutdown reflects Congress's failure to pass the necessary funding legislation for the 2026 fiscal year, and a deep partisan divide over policy rather than merely dollars. Mr.
Chairman, how do you respond?
According to the editorial board of the Washington Post, the correct move is to reopen the government with a clean funding bill immediately. That means no added major policy demands embedded in the must-pass funding resolution. The board specifically writes, the right answer is to reopen the government with a clean funding bill, ideally for a full year, then have a debate about ACA subsidies. In other words, get people back to work and essential services running, then fight over policies later. Meanwhile, columnist Preston Xanthopoulos writes in Seco Astonline that Washington is broken. The shutdown proves it. He argues this isn't a one-off hiccup. It is a symptom of systemic failure. Legislative gridlock, disregard for governing norms, and a political culture more focused on leverage than on service. So we have two main frames. One sees a tactical mistake by Democrats, according to the Post editorial, and the other sees long-term institutional decay, according to Seco Astonline. Section 2. Who holds the cards? Political dynamics. Who is doing what, and why? First, the Democrats. They are demanding that any reopening of government funding include an extension of subsidies under the Affordable Care Act, ACA, before they will agree to vote for the continuing resolution. The Washington Post editorial argues this is a mistake of strategy. By combining funding bills with major policy demands, Democrats are holding the government hostage for leverage. Second, Republicans and other critics say, reopen the government first, then negotiate policy later. The Post editorial aligns with that approach. They argue that essential services shouldn't be victim to legislative brinkmanship. Third, the federal workforce and public. The shutdown means hundreds of thousands of federal workers are furloughed or working without pay. Essential programs, i.e., not funded by annual appropriations, may continue, but many agencies are in limbo. Preston Xanthopoulos frames it this way. The government is shut down again? He sees this as a clear message. The system supposedly built to govern is failing at its basic job. Importantly, the conflict here is not just budget arithmetic. It's about leverage, which side can extract policy wins by holding up the process. And that dynamic, analysts argue, is what makes this shutdown different, and possibly more lasting. Section 3. Impacts, economic, social, global. Now let's unpack the real-world consequences of the shutdown. Because while it sounds like Washington speak, the impacts reach far beyond the Beltway. Economic cost. The Nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office, CBO, warns that the shutdown could cost between $7 billion and $14 billion in lost economic output. In the fourth quarter alone, GDP is expected to fall by 1 to 2 percentage points because of delayed federal spending and unpaid workers. On public services, programs like the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, SNAP, supporting tens of millions of Americans, face funding interruption. The Post notes this is starting to change the shutdown's visibility because more people will be directly impacted. On federal employees, furloughs, working without pay, mounting financial stress. Xanthopoulos highlights that this illustrates the human cost of the breakdown. On governance and credibility, when the world's largest economy and its government institutions stop functioning, even partially, it sends shockwaves. Xanthopoulos, Washington is broken. The editorial board agrees that refusing to reopen the government is shamefully inflicting pain on the American people for political leverage. In the global arena, allies and markets watch how capable the U.S. is of managing its own operations. On politics, the longer the shutdown, the greater the risk of public backlash. The Washington Post editorial suggests that what has been largely invisible may soon become visible as benefits stop and services falter, making blame tangible. This means the stakes are higher. It's not just about Washington's internal drama anymore. It's about everyday Americans, the economy, and U.S. global standing. Section 4. What comes next? Potential paths forward. Given all this, what are the possible routes out? And what should happen if you're watching this from outside the U.S.? trying to understand global implications. Option 1. A clean continuing resolution. This is what the Washington Post editorial calls for. Pass a funding bill that opens government operations without tying in big policy fights. Then negotiate ACA subsidies and other issues separately. Option 2. Prolonged shutdown and increased damage. Xanthopoulos warns that a slice-by-slice, leverage-based shutdown will continue until one side gives up or until public pressure forces it. The longer it goes, the deeper the structural damage. Option 3. Institutional reform. Beyond just funding, this crisis spotlights how budget/appropriations processes may need overhaul. The Post editorial board and other analysts point out that the system is breaking down. What you should watch for. Do lawmakers pass a pure funding bill? Or will policy riders remain attached? Will federal employees receive back pay and are agencies able to ramp up operations quickly? What happens to SNAP and other safety net programs? Will international markets and foreign governments react to any signs of U.S. governmental dysfunction? For your channel, you can highlight, this is not just U.S. domestic drama. The U.S. budget process, government operations and fiscal credibility are essential parts of global stability. Section 5. Why it matters globally. From Jeddah to Johannesburg, from Riyadh to London, you might ask, why should I care about a U.S. government shutdown? Here are 3 reasons. 1. Global economic ripple effects. The U.S. economy is central in global trade, finance and investment. A downturn or credibility hit in Washington can affect currencies, commodity prices and global markets. 2. Policy leadership vacuum. When the U.S. government is partially shut down, its capacity for diplomacy, aid, security commitments and multilateral cooperation is constrained. That matters when you're tracking global geopolitics. 3. Precedent and signal. A shutdown that drags on signals weakness. Other countries may see that the U.S. is losing its capacity to govern efficiently. That can embolden competitors or unsettle allies. So while the headlines may read Washington shut down, the implications are global. Conclusion. Call to action. Let's recap. The U.S. shutdown